Okay, so typically every week we put together our DF Direct docket, and always there's like a lack of topics to discuss. And so it was this week until a whole raft of news stories basically broke at the same time. And this one is fascinating. It's been now confirmed officially. Forza Horizon 5 will be coming to PlayStation 5. It's all part of this new strategy for Microsoft to get their games to as many gamers as possible. Looks like Panic Button are going to be handling the port. A developer which we have a great deal of respect for, following their work on Switch specifically, but this is pretty exciting stuff. And obviously there's been interviews with Phil Spencer over the last couple of weeks where he seems to be introducing the multi-format strategy in more depth, talking about new hardware. We'll talk about that separately. But Alex, Forza Horizon 5 on PlayStation 5, obviously there's a lot of people worried about the implications for Xbox as a platform, but ultimately, I don't know about you, but I just think, games on more systems for more people to enjoy is ultimately a good thing, right?
That sounds like everything I would have also just said. And I also don't find this very surprising based upon what we've been hearing since the beginning of last year, roughly. I think things, the few things that we have seen ported since then, Sea of Thieves and whatnot showed quite well that first-party developers for long-standing Xbox-only titles can see later ports very easily to Sony's platform, PlayStation 5 there. And in this case, it is also not internally done. So it is not going to be taking away resources from the internal development, presumably, at least not great ones. There's probably some oversight, of course. Let's not forget that. But, this is very much like the Sony strategy actually on PC in that aspect, where they are porting things rather late at the moment. And then giving it to another developer to do majority of the porting work. I expect to see this for a ton of other titles soon enough. And in a case like this one, every single gamer that could have played it on the platforms available at this point, this game's pretty old now, they've probably tapped out that consumer base. And why not just make a lot more money by doing a port to the most popular core gamer console out there, that is the PlayStation. So this all makes sense to me. I'm also just very curious though about like what they're going to do technically with it. It's, PlayStation 5 is very similar to the Xbox Series X, but it has, other things. It's got the triggers, the DualSense, haptics. It's also got a different GPU setup. And I'm curious to see like what resolution would be if they push for something different in that direction. 120 hertz has gotten more popular ever since that game launched. 40 FPS modes have gotten more popular. All these things that I imagine a developer like Panic Button could take the time to actually add to a PlayStation 5 version.
That's an interesting thought, but you'd want those features back ported to the Xbox version as well, right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Oliver, the other thing, of course, is that PlayStation has a pro console. So you've got to wonder how that is going to factor into the equation. What's your thoughts on this whole endeavor?
Yeah, well, for the pro console, I think they could probably do some interesting things. I'm not exactly sure how far they will push it, but you could see something maybe closer to like the extreme PC preset in, let's say, the PS5's performance mode or PS5 Pro's performance mode. That would certainly be interesting. But I think in general, like my personal preference here would be that they go down the route of using like a TAA type solution or FSR instead of MSAA. I tend to find that on PC, at least when I've experimented with the game, and on handheld, certainly, I've liked the use of FSR and TAA and these other temporal techniques with Forza Horizon 5's artwork. Not so much MSAA there with all the flickering you get in the foliage, and it doesn't look perfectly pristine in the way that a nice temporal technique can kind of treat that image. I'm not really that fussed too much about the artifacts too if they were to go with something like PSSR, because I feel like they're operating from really high resolutions. Like on Series X, it's a dynamic, like close to 4K, even in the performance mode. Like it's a pretty high resolution game there. So I wouldn't be too worried about what technique they go with. I would just prefer that they not go with MSAA, frankly. And then also I would like that work to be, yeah, hopefully backported the Xbox version if they were to go a route of actually overhauling the image treatment there. So we don't end up with a situation like Red Dead Redemption 1 on PS5 versus Xbox, where the Xbox version is stuck with like spatial AA techniques and the PS5 version gets like FSR2 or something. That certainly wouldn't be ideal. But yeah, in general, Forza Horizon 5 looks great, runs great. I'm sure it's going to be a treat on PlayStation 5, especially with Panic Button at the helm. The only real question mark for me, I'm sure the PS5 will probably fare pretty well in this title. My question mark is really just when it comes to PS5 Pro. Do they use PSSR? Do they push out the settings preset? Or do they just like ride DRS and call it a day? Which would also be fine. I'm not offended by that necessarily. But it would be nice to see a little bit more elbow grease put into that particular aspect of the port.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd be interested to see how PSSR interacts with Forza. I'm actually a bit of a fan of the MSAA. I recognize what you're saying with the foliage, but stuff like power lines and whatnot break up quite badly without it.
Yeah.
The game was designed around 4x MSAA, but obviously the TAA was added as an option. So, maybe you'd get the best of both worlds with PSSR with a high resolution. That would be quite interesting to see. I like the fact it's crossplay. They're just bringing the whole community together. Doesn't really matter what hardware you're using. I think that's great. But let's talk about some supporter questions on this one. And this is the old chestnut here from Alan from the Discord. Hi guys, is Xbox the new Sega? They spent $70 billion buying Activision Blizzard King, and a year after that deal closes, they're seeing a 7% drop in earnings, paying $70 billion for an asset only to experience negative growth within a year! Exclamation point. Forza Horizon 5 just announced on PlayStation 5. All the big Xbox games will be on every other system. Is there any reason to buy Xbox hardware? That's the key point, right? And we'll talk about hardware a bit more in the next topic, where Phil is basically addressing how they're going to be tackling the next-gen console and why you should buy one. But ultimately, I think the strategy here is pretty straightforward, right? Which is to say that games are becoming so expensive to make that to sustain the investment, you've got to get them into the hands of as many players as possible. I don't see any negative, as you say, Alex, with Forza Horizon 5. For two reasons. First of all, it's an old game. You're quite right. The community would have been sort of tapped out on the existing platforms. Secondly, it's still a beautiful game and a great game that will move on to PlayStation, which is a system that doesn't really have a game like this at all. So I just think it's going to do phenomenally well. This question from Diego El Rey. Hello, DF Jeds! Exclamation point. Forza Horizon 5 was just announced for the PS5. We've known Phil Spencer's plans for releasing Xbox games on other platforms, and we've seen the results bear fruit. Feels like Forza is probably the ultimate Xbox IP to go multi-platform with, where nothing could be considered sacred afterwards, possibly Gears as well. I put them above other Xbox IPs because they consistently review well, whereas even Halo has had well-known missteps. Do you believe Sony is likely to return the favour, or does their favourable position keep them from considering it? I don't know what you think about this one, Oliver, but I don't see Sony returning the favour. It just doesn't seem to make sense because Xbox is basically a diversifying platform that's about more than just Xboxes. I'm not even sure there's enough Xbox consoles and potential sell-through there to make it happen. I don't know what you think.
No, I don't. I mean, outside of like limited efforts, like MLB The Show would be one exception. I really couldn't see it. I really couldn't see it. One exception would be something maybe that involves like a third-party deal, which you also see with MLB The Show. Like I could imagine Marvel coming in and saying, hey, for our new IP here, our new Mystery Man IP, we want you to be on all platforms or something, right? I could imagine that being the case with third party coming in and imposing it. But I don't think there's a compelling commercial incentive for Sony to do so because, frankly, the Xbox market is not that large, and Sony gets so much value from being able to say, here's our box that plays our games, buy it if you want to play our games. Now, alternatively, now they basically say, well, buy our games on this box, or you can wait 2 years and maybe get it on PC, and maybe that port will be good, or maybe it won't be so good, as we'll possibly be discussing a little bit later. But they have that really compelling marketing strategy of saying, you want to play the new God of War, you want to play the new Spider-Man, you want to play the new Last of Us, you want to play the new Intergalactic, whatever, you're going to have to play it on PS5 first, right? So if they lose that incentive, I kind of feel like they're starting to give up a more core part of their identity than Microsoft, who for the last 10 years at least has been multi-platform, has been on PC day and date typically, along with Xbox. It's a bit of a different strategy. It's a little bit less of a break for Microsoft, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously they're talking about as many platforms as possible, and they're also talking about Nintendo Switch 2. They're being pretty overt about that now. If a game will run on Switch 2, it's likely to appear on that. What can I say? I think it's great. I don't really have any particular issues with this, and obviously the approach to hardware is going to be very, very different going forward. So, best of luck to them with it, to be honest. Forza Horizon 5, though, I just think it's such a fantastic game, and it should do really, really well, especially when there is a big Forza Horizon 5 shape hole within the PlayStation ecosystem.